first thing we're going to do is we're going to play more with Phonegap, except now we're going to, instead of building out on the cloud, we're going to do a build locally to show how that's done and talk about. We tried to do the one example on Tuesday and it didn't work, but doing the build locally did work. And I hope this guy has a camera. Yes, it does. All right, good. I just happened to think of that. So we're going to work on doing an example, run through it of having Phonegap installed locally, integrated with Eclipse, and creating a project, and so on. So that's probably our biggest topic today. We then will discuss what we will do the next 2 weeks. We have one more week of classes, and we have the final exam week. So we'll talk about that. And lastly, we will have the course evaluation. And I'll double check with you to see if anyone has any questions for me before I go, because I'm not supposed to be in the room when the evaluation, and someone has to take it upstairs. And if you do have questions like about the lab or an assignment or whatever, I'll go and hang out in the lab and wait until you're done, and we'll go up there. All right, so last time in lecture we used Build Phonegap to take a HTML5 application that we developed, which was just a simple map thing, upload it to GitHub, create a GitHub repository for it, and then do a build in the cloud using Build Phone Cloud for Android, Windows, Phone, BlackBerry, a mess of platforms. The only one that didn't work was the iOS, probably because I didn't supply the relevant key information or whatever. We'll just very briefly review that. Again, there's a recording of Monday's lecture where you can see the full details of it if you're interested. So we'll take a minute to review what I did there without actually going through all the steps.
When you say locally, you mean like downloading?
Downloading Phonegap to my machine, right? In fact, I have the work from Tuesday on this machine, so I'll show it on the desktop instead of the laptop. Okay, so what I did is I installed GitHub. Again, GitHub is a mechanism for providing repositories for open source projects and revision control and that sort of thing. I created on my local drive a repository, LCCC, which has my HTML page in it, which is just a little page that does some geolocation, and it shows a map of the college and has some buttons to click around and show the different buildings. So just something, this is something I actually did for my other class, the mobile web class. They did a project like this, and I did just a real small proof of concept example for them. So that's the HTML page. We then went and I created a repository in GitHub. All right. So the only software I loaded to this machine was GitHub. I did not really need to load anything concerning Phonegap. All right. Let's review the distinction between the two. GitHub is a place to store open source repositories of software. To do a build using Build Phonegap, you need one of two things. Either you need to upload a zip file, or you need to supply an open repository from GitHub. Now, you're allowed, with a free account on PhoneHub, you're allowed one private project. So I could upload this as a zip file, and it would go and it would do the build and all that. But I could only do one of them. All right. So instead what I did is I created a repository in GitHub and then used that to do my Phonegap build. So here's GitHub is the bottom line, the repository. I made my, I did everything, and then I published it up to the web. And again, it says there that I'm in sync, which means that there hasn't been any changes. There's no changes up on the cloud. I have the right version here. So I then went to build Phonegap. So I strictly speaking did not need anything from Phonegap on my machine. I just needed something for the GitHub so I could create a repository. So I then went to build .phonegap. Without downloading anything from that, I went and logged in. I created a project that is tied to that repository on GitHub, and then I just click build. Builds it for all the platforms. Yep. It always fails on iOS, probably because I have no key selected. You need a key to publish your app for that. And we even have the QR reader that you could read and just point that to it and install just from that. All right, which is pretty nifty. I am not sure. The HP platform. Let's see. One of them. All right. We have Apple, Android, BlackBerry, Windows, and then two others. One of the others was Debian, I believe.
But the QR code must work for each.
Well, it's probably smart enough when you go to that page to know what device you're coming from. And then it sends you to the appropriate place depending on the device. So if you're on an Android phone, it gives you the Android file. Pretty straightforward coding. You can query the user agent and see what they're coming from. So this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now I just did a very vanilla application. In other words, mine was a pure HTML5 application. It didn't particularly take advantage of any native functionality of the device. In other words, it didn't integrate with the camera or the accelerometer or anything like that. There is a set of libraries that are incorporated into Phonegap. And if you want to use the camera or other things, you would go and incorporate those libraries. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you, and again, this is great, right? I did this very quick and dirty. Only installed one thing, the GitHub, just so I could create a repository up there and make changes to it. I wonder, if Joey's watching this, I wonder if I forgot to click update, if I didn't click update code, that's why I couldn't update. I did the same exercise in my web class last night, and I actually updated my HTML file, but the app didn't reflect the updates. And I wonder if I needed to click update code to do that. That might very well be.
You mean when you had trouble with the phone or the camera?
Mm-mm. No, this is something else, yeah. This was making a change to my web page. I put a header on it, a banner on it, and it wasn't showing up. But I'll bet it's because I forgot to click that update code. At any rate, so this is straightforward. This is nice because I don't have to worry about any of the SDKs on my machine. I don't have to have an Apple development platform and an Android development platform and all those other ones. It does that for you. Now, as you know, though, anything that does stuff for you kind of is a problem because you can't really get in there and see what's going on and troubleshoot things effectively. At least that's kind of my opinion. And that was characterized by what we ran into where I tried to get the little sample camera application going. I just couldn't get it to work. All right? And all I'm doing is uploading code. I uploaded the sample code, right? I didn't even write the code, so it's not my ego saying my code is so good that it can't possibly be wrong. It wasn't even my code. All right? But obviously something didn't work right. I didn't do something right in there. And I'm not really sure what it is. And to troubleshoot that kind of thing is going to be a little bit hard. All right? So there's sometimes when you just want to take the bull by the horns, if we're doing the development anyhow, and just do everything on our machine. That gives you a much better shot at debugging and all that. So that's what we're going to do in today's exercise. I'm going to run through what I did to install and build a Phonegap application, but all local, not using the cloud. Now, what I downloaded, all right, I posted a couple links to Angel that are very useful here. The first link was a nice little tutorial on getting started with this. Tells the things that we have to do. And since we've been developing Android all along, we did a lot of them already, so it was easy. We already installed Eclipse and all that. So let's go here. Links for that. Getting started. All right. What do you need? You need Eclipse. We got that, right? We need Android SDK. We got that. We need Phonegap. We don't have that. So Phonegap is going to be like the libraries and the different components that will allow us to, A, take an HTML5 app and create an Android app from it. And also it has the Cordova components, which allow us to have a hook into the device functionality, like the camera and the contacts and all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Phonegap includes Cordova?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly like the history of that. I have a feeling one of them got incorporated into the other. And I know Adobe owns Phonegap now, so I don't know the history of it to tell all that. But it's my idea that there were, independent things that sort of got merged together. Yes? Cordova is a set of components that will allow you to through the HTML code, through the HTML and JavaScript code, access the components of the device, like the camera and so on. All right, so we've already done up to here. All right, so we got to download the Phonegap application, which I did. All right. Really doesn't matter. You can kind of put it anywhere because we're going to copy the stuff in to that. So let's go in Android. Yeah, I have an Android folder, and I put that in there. We're going to be, since we're doing Android development in here, we're going to be interested in the Android folder. So that's where we're going to be doing our work. As you notice, there's all these other options as well, but we're interested in the Android one.
Right now, you're looking at the folders that are created after you install Phonegap.
Yeah, these are the folders that come in Phonegap. Right. All right. So, what do we do? I went in and created a new Android project just by going project new. All right. Create a new project in Workspace. I essentially took all the defaults. All right. Picked my SDK. Gave my application name and package name and all that sort of stuff. All right. So essentially I did this. I'm not going to do it again because I already have this up and running, but I went up here and said new Android project and just worked through the wizard. And I took the defaults for everything. All right, so nothing.
It's not in, Phonegap's not integrated into this.
No, it isn't.
This is after you install.
This is after we have installed Phonegap. Now what we have to do is we have to tie that new project we created to Phonegap. All right. So how do you do that? Well, I create an assets www directory and a libs directory inside my Android project. So inside my Android project, I have an assets www folder that contains my web pages. I did two flavors of this application, so I have index 1 or I have index and index 2. You wouldn't need both of them. I was switching back and forth between the two. All right. So I put all of my HTML that I've developed in there. All right.
The Android 4?
Does it have to be? I do not believe so. No. No. I don't believe so. All right. So I put my HTML in there. All right. Now, I then went and copied from my Phonegap installation 3 files into my Eclipse project. All right. Into my www folder, I copied the Cordova-2.2.0.javascript. That was from my Android folder inside of Phonegap. So I copied that to my www folder. I copied the jar to my libs folder. And finally, I copied yeah, this isn't really an installation process. This is configuring this to work with to use Phonegap. Yeah, and I created a config file, or I dragged the config file over from the Android folder as well.
You do this for every app.
Do this for every app that you would do. Right. Right. A little bit of prep work to get it going. So again, copy the jar, the JS, and the XML file. Oh, it said copy the XML directory. I actually just copied the XML file and it still seemed to work. So, oh, never mind. Copy the whole folder. I did it in 2 steps. I created the folder, then copied the file. So, did the same thing. At any rate, you copy the folders from the Android folder to your Eclipse project. So when you're done, you should have these 3 things in addition to the stuff that you've created, which we do.
XML.
The XML is the 3rd piece. And then the libs, and then the Cordova JS. All right. Now we create our HTML file. All right. They're doing just a Hello World app, so this is their HTML file. I took on mine, and I took their one example of the one example that I got off the web of using a camera. Yeah, the one I was using the other night. So I took this file, but the bottom line is this is just an HTML file that I create, and I call it index.html. All right.
Now, does the fact that it's Android 5 have any significance versus 4?
That is HTML5? That is a good question. Given the fact that well-formed HTML4 also probably follows HTML5 rules, probably not. I don't know if I did it like with the HTML4 doc type, if it would have an issue with that, but it really isn't an issue. For example, that map application I did, there's nothing particularly HTML5 about it. I mean, it could have just been an HTML4 page. I did use an HTML5 doc type though, so that's a good question. All the documentation I see talks about doing it in HTML5, but again, I don't know if that's an actual requirement. All right. You need to add that library to the build path. So that jar file that I put in my libs folder, I have to go and build path, and it's already there, but if it wasn't there, there'd be an option to add it. And I just go click that, and it will do its thing, and it would add it to the build path. And you can see that because it's up here in reference libraries. That added it to the build path. All right. Now, I want to edit the activity. And there's my activity. It's pretty straightforward. I import the DroidGap object, or class rather, and my onCreate simply says superload URL and has the path to my asset HTML directory. So I extend DroidGap, and really all I do essentially is say open the index page, open the index web page, and I'm good to go. Pretty straightforward on there. Oh yeah, I'm not quite there yet. There's a few other things I need to do. Whoops. Mostly. I still have a little bit of configuration on the manifest and all that to do. All right. Here's some things to add to the manifest. Support different screen sizes. Give these permissions so that it can access all those things, so it can access the camera and all that.
But you don't need them all.
Probably don't need them all. This guy's probably just being safe in granting them all. And then a couple other things to change the activity nodes and to create a second activity node. And that should be it. All right? So let's review what we did. We have our HTML as a starting point. So we'll consider that we have our HTML completed and it's sitting out there waiting. We won't talk about how to develop that, but we'll just assume we had it. We downloaded the Phonegap stuff. We copied into, we created our application in Eclipse. We went in and copied the Cordova.js file, the Cordova library, and the XML folder from Phonegap's Android folder into our project, into our application. All right? We then went and added that jar, that Cordova jar, to the build path. All right? And we changed our activity to extend the DroidGap and to call our page when the activity starts. And then we made miscellaneous changes to our manifest. I think that's everything. All right? So there's still not a ton of work. All right? This is a long way, and the long way isn't really that much longer than the short way. But, again, if you're thinking about like when you'd use one versus the other, given the fact that I already have Eclipse installed on this machine and all that, yeah, it makes sense to go in and install Phonegap and do that. If I was thinking, though, if I did not have any of that installed, all right, to go in and install Eclipse and configure that, all that, just so I can test this, you might be better off using the build Phonegap and build it out in the cloud. All right? Now, the last step, go ahead.
Still won't be able to debug those words.
Well, yeah. It's like any other application, right? You should be able to. I guess it depends what you mean by debug, but...
Well, the HTML for your sim.
Yeah, I suppose. But again, remember, if we're going to be using some of those Cordova things, you can't like test that in the browser. So I guess it depends what's in your HTML page, if that makes sense. All right, let's here. And let's go and run this guy. Run as Android application. All right. And here we go. There are 4 buttons on here. If I click capture photo, that actually fires up my camera. So I can take a picture. Oh, it's probably in the way. There we go. What do you have to click to take the picture? Oh, this. Oh, yeah, great. Great picture of my arm. Let's take, let's discard that. And let's take a picture of the door. Yeah. I save this, and now it is in my page. Small to be sure, but it is in my page. There's other things we can do. Capture an editable photograph. I'm not really sure what that does. Keep in mind this is the example code. We'll take the chair. Okay, I'm not sure what that did. Bring in photo library. From photo album. At any rate, we saw it did something. All right. The other thing we can do is we can run my application. If I go and I rename these files around. So yeah, I'm not sure. That sample code seems to kind of work, but maybe not 100%. Could be a versioning problem or whatever. Here we'll take something that I'm pretty sure works, provided I'm connected to the internet. Let me make sure I'm connected. I am. Okay. Let's go and build this again. All I did was swapped out index and index 2. So now when I run it, it'll run my HTML page instead of the other one. Does seem to take a while to compile this. I did notice that some of the other apps that compile a little quicker, but it does take a bit of time to compile that. All right, and there we go. In fact, since this is a mobile device with a GPS, it actually knows where we are. And if I walk around, that actually changes a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't put me in Elyria, right, because it's not doing IP-based location. It's actually using the internal GPS to do that. So, again, this is my application. And again, you know, it works and pretty straightforward. I have to say I hadn't played too much with the Cordova, just getting that going, but that again offers the potential to do real mobile kind of stuff with it, you know. But again, we see an example of without a terrible amount of difficulty with just installing, you know, the Phonegap stuff and doing a little tweaking when you create your application, of being able to take an HTML5 application and deploy it as an Android application, and all the good things that can come from that. All right, we mentioned the marketing thing. It's great to have apps. You know, people promote that, advertise that. You can promote it in the App Store. You know, for people that don't want to go through a mobile web browser, a lot of people prefer to access an app as opposed to that because it's so nice at a click of a button. Instead of opening up your browser and going to a web page at a click of a button, it's very directed and focused, takes you to where you want to go. You could probably, and again, I didn't get into it that deep, but you could probably go and incorporate this stuff into a larger application. So maybe you had a mobile application and maybe only a component of it was this way. You could probably incorporate that as well. The other advantage too is in terms of skill sets for an organization. If you think of having an iPhone developer and an Android developer and all that, yeah, you know, that could be a pain. Versus someone who, an HTML5 programmer, that knows enough about Android to do this stuff, and maybe knows enough about iPhones to do that. I would imagine the process is comparable on iPhones. Although, if what Paul tells me is true, it's probably more complicated. Yeah, as I say, it's probably a bigger pain to do it there. Yeah, using this to use the iPhone. You'd do a similar thing. I'm sure there'd be a way that you'd bring in, you'd put your HTML code somewhere, you'd create your application, you'd tweak the settings to use this stuff, and then you'd be good to go. But I'm guessing there's more. You know, if I was a betting man, I'd say there's probably more steps. Yes?
So the skills you would need would be CSS, HTML5, JavaScript.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then again, enough Android that you could do kind of like what I did, you know. You wouldn't, you know, obviously the more you know about Android, you might be able to do a more involved application, maybe a component of which was this. Maybe one view in your application was this, and you had other views to do other things.
Yeah, especially where, like with the native stuff, you would maybe have things where Phonegap would be more quick win.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking you could adopt a number of good and reasonable strategies. Again, I haven't you know, anytime you introduce another layer into something, it tends to complicate things, especially for maintenance and all that. So, although the Cordova apparently gives you control over the device and its native functionality, you know, just speaking from past experience, that kind of intermediary step is vulnerable to breaking. You know, when a new version comes out of Android or whatever. All right. So because of that, I tend to be a little bit I won't say skeptical, but cautious when you talk about using that intermediary step to do that. So again, you know, the idea is, I think, that, you know, as a developer, the more you know, the better. Because then you are picking from, you can pick the best tool for the job. All right? As opposed to saying, I'm an Android guy, I'm going to do it this way. You know, you can take a step back and maybe view the bigger picture and decide an approach to take on a problem. If, you know, as far as like a technical manager, it's good to be familiar with all this stuff again, so that you can be involved in decisions, and so that you can, you know, question your developers. You know, that's a whole other story. I worked with, when I was a consultant, I worked with project managers that were technical folk, and I worked with project managers that kind of came from a business project management background. And we could have a lot of fun talking about some of those experiences. The best technical managers, even if they're not like the guy that you'd go to write an assembly language program, at least they're technically sharp. They're not vulnerable to being BS'd by the developers. But you get someone that doesn't have a strong technical background at all, I don't know. It just doesn't work in my opinion. It just doesn't work as well. You need some of that. You don't necessarily need to be the best programmer on earth. In fact, probably the best programmer on earth would make a horrible manager, but you do need some sort of technical sense so that you're in a better position to make decisions from a strategic viewpoint as opposed to strictly from a technical viewpoint. All right. But that's a topic all into itself. It's a great topic, though. All right. I'm going to finish the recording if there's no questions about this so that we can talk about our other couple of things. So let me turn off my mic and I'll tell them we're done.